Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to another AK Upgrades video. This is the follow-up review video of the original installation video I did on this Sureshot Mark 2.1 chassis. It's been about just a little bit over 3 weeks now, so I feel like I've had enough time with this. I've been shooting a lot of rounds with it, so I'm going to talk about it now. For a point of comparison, because it's always good to have a point of comparison for how this handguard, or rather entire chassis system is, I'm going to be comparing it to a very similar Zenitco setup that I have here on my SLR 104, which, as a bit of a caveat, I do know that the Zenitco stuff has gotten a lot harder to come by now. When I did this build, it was still a little bit hard because you had to get a lot of stuff through Russia, but it was nowhere near as difficult as it is now. It looks like, at least when I'm making this video, like things may be kind of coming back with that, but it's certainly more expensive now than it used to be. So keeping that in mind, that I will be a little bit biased because I completed this build before things got absolutely insane over with certain part of the world. And also keep in mind that there is a lot of other options for a similar setup, at least with an extended handguard. Not so much with a full chassis setup like this, but of course I'm just going to be comparing, mostly talking about this, and then, as I said, a little bit of a comparison with the Zenitco, but I'm not going to be talking about every single option out there on the market. I'll probably briefly mention them, but just keep that in mind. If you're interested in some of the other options and you're just kind of weighing how this Sureshot does, then just keep that in mind. Take what I talk about in this video and just apply it to whatever else you're looking at as a comparison. So with that introduction and kind of caveat out of the way, let's go ahead and first talk about the comparison between the Zenitco setup. So I think a good starting point would be to talk about the weight. Now, I'm not going to be directly comparing the weight to this, how I have it set up here, because it wouldn't be the most fair comparison. For starters, I have a full B33 railed receiver cover here, and I also just have the standard length handguard. So I did weigh out what a similar Zenitco setup would be. Thankfully, they have all their weights on their website, so this will be correct. And I already weighed what just the chassis itself would be, and I'll put that up on the screen now. But comparing this Sureshot chassis to a very similar Zenitco setup, which would be their extended handguard, and they do make several lengths of extended handguards. Zenitco does, for example, they have the leader kit, which goes pretty much all the way out, the sport kit, tons of different versions, but the most similar length would be the B30. Specifically, what I would say, and you can kind of argue this back and forth a little bit, the B30U, I would say, would be the most similar to the Sureshot, because this is all M-Lok, and the B30U has Basis, which is Zenitco's own proprietary mounting system. It's supposed to be pretty good. I haven't ever personally used it, but kind of beside the point. The point is it's similar, and it's nice and lightweight, so it would come out to about here. As I said, very similar. However, that would actually weigh, and bear in mind, the B30U that I'm comparing it to does have a full Picatinny on the bottom, whereas this Sureshot does not. It's just a top rail, and then the rest, every side, is M-Lok. And so, as you can see with the weights that I put up on the screen, and I'm not saying them because I don't remember what they exactly were, but I already pre-calced them, and it's actually, surprisingly, even with the Zenitco having a full-length Picatinny rail on the bottom here, as well as on the top, it's actually lighter. Now, one other thing you want to keep in mind when you're comparing this to a Zenitco setup is, if you go with that B30 and then a B31 upper handguard, you are going to have a bit of a split right here where your handguard retainer is on the gas tube. It just kind of has to be that way, just to accommodate it. Comparing that to the Sureshot here, as I said, you have no rail on the bottom, just the top. And the nice thing about this is they do have a proprietary gas tube. Well, I say good, there's actually a bit of a downside to this as well, but their gas tube doesn't have any of that handguard retention on it, because it doesn't need it. And so you just have a nice full-length Picatinny rail, which is quite good, because this is if I were to put a light on this, and this is just a backup rifle to the SLR, in the event it ever did go down, then I could just move everything over onto here. I have the light mounts and everything already, but it's just a nice continuous rail, so I could put the pressure pad exactly where I want it, and the mount, the flashlight mount in this case, if I were to put it there, I'd probably end up putting it right about here. That's where I run it on my MR556, and it's a pretty comfortable spot, at least so far, from what I found. One thing to keep in mind, however, so I do like this extended length handguard. You can see, actually, if I were to go back and do the Zenitco build again, I would absolutely go with the B30. It's just a lot more comfortable to get my hand a little bit further out. Not even that much, but what's comfortable for me is to go out to about the end of this handguard here, and that's quite comfortable. Another thing though, if you're mounting a light and a pressure pad up here, is I don't know how comfortable it would be to kind of have your thumb resting against that all the time, at least for me, because I do like a high thumb position. So if you are mounting that sort of stuff, I would almost think that I would want this a little bit longer then. But if you're just running it like this, or if you possibly mount the light and your pressure pad somewhere else, it'd probably end up being fine as well. But it's good, it's quite comfortable. Now, one thing you may notice, especially if you watched my previous installation video, I mentioned that, so in the installation video, I just had the chassis and the aim point on here, and I said that that's probably all I'm going to do. Obviously, I have a foregrip on here now. This is actually very temporary. The reason for that is this is a little bit too long. It is right on the threshold of being an issue. It's currently most of the time not an issue. Some of the times when I've tried reloads, it kind of gets caught. As you can see here, if I take the mag out, it bumps right there. If you do go with if you do go with a foregrip, I would say to go with BCMs. They make a slightly shorter one, or you can just buy this length and just chop it. Similar to that Zenitco setup with the foregrip, as you can see, kind of having this slant to it in the back. That works great, especially on the 7.62 AKs, because you do have a full-on banana down here with how much curvature there is, so you do need to go out a lot. But another thing, in my case, I don't even need that, so you can kind of think of, and this is somewhat beside the point of the handguard itself, but it might help a bit just because of how long it is and how you might want to set it up similarly if you get this or a different extended handguard, is where I'm at right now. So the reason I have this foregrip on here is for a bit extra control. I noticed when I put my hand out here at the end of the rail, I have just kind of this, just kind of doing nothing, hence why I have the foregrip. However, I don't need the foregrip on all this. I'm probably going to end up going with a hand stop, most likely the Phase 5, but if you can see here, this is all I'm using, so I don't need any of this. A hand stop is going to work completely fine, just right in this position. Which brings me to my next point regarding the mounting of accessories to the bottom, because I ran into a little bit of an issue here, which I didn't even really think about, and that is the mount itself. So first off, one kind of nice feature about this is this entire chassis is free floated, so you don't have any point of impact shift depending on if you're shooting off of obstacles or depending on how you're using your sling and all that. At kind of longer ranges, it's not too much of an issue. At closer range, of course. So actually, before I talk about the issue I'm noticing with this mount, I did test the accuracy just to see if there's any difference with how I had this set up before. So I'm going to go ahead and just play that footage right now. So let's get started. For the accuracy test, I'm going to be using 10 rounds of Silver Bear soft point. Historically, from before I had this handguard and all of that, this has been the most accurate ammo that I've found through this rifle, so should be the best way to test it and compare it. And when I get back and actually compare the results, I'll put up what the best results were from before with just the regular furniture. But we'll go ahead and see how this does now. This is zeroed for 50 yards. I'm shooting at 100, so bear in mind it won't be necessarily right dead center, but it should be precise. Okay. So that's the 10. A few things to note. Of course, this isn't the most perfect test because I'm not isolating just the handguard. I am shooting with an optic, which is the biggest difference. Even though this is a non-magnified, just an aim point, it's still significantly more precise, and I can see a lot better where I'm actually aiming than the rather thick sights, iron sights of the AK. We're back. I already measured that group, and it is actually significantly better. It's still pretty bad, being over 5 MOA, but it is almost an entire MOA approximately better than it was before. Of course, that probably is more to do with having a better optic on here, as I already kind of mentioned in that footage. But is there some of that from the different mounting system of the handguard and all that as well? Possibly. It's, as I said, it's hard to really measure that, and I didn't really want to switch back to iron sights because these are really low, and I do have some neck issues that have been getting worse, so I actually can barely use these iron sights now. But it is what it is. Point being, whether it's the aim point or whatever, this is a quite a bit more accurate setup. So cool there. Now, what I was alluding to earlier, some issues with this mount comes into when you want to mount stuff back here. So if you look very closely, I hope you can see that right there. So these are M-Lok slots. Notice these look like M-Lok slots right here on the sides of the gas tube. They're actually not. But everything around your lower handguard area is an actual M-Lok slot, and that's cool. However, you cannot use these back ones right here. If you're running a hand stop or a foregrip, in my case, you could mount one in this very back M-Lok slot right here. However, right where I want to mount and where I have this mounted right now, it actually collides. Let's see if you can see the band that kind of goes around the barrel right there. That is really close to the M-Lok on the bottom here. And actually, I mean, luckily it's just a foregrip. It doesn't need to hold zero or anything, but when I tighten this down, my front M-Lok T-nut is totally fine and it's in place completely. But the back one was actually, I'm not able to fully torque it down. And again, it doesn't matter too much because it's just a foregrip, but that is something to keep in mind depending on what kind of foregrip or hand stop you're using. It's possible, depending on how it lines up, you may not be able to get it fully in, and I would kind of worry about it potentially coming loose. So far it hasn't, but some hand stops I know only attach with one T-nut, and I kind of worry about those a bit more. And I believe that the hand stop that I'm looking at is like that. It's positioned a bit differently, so I think it'll be fine, but we'll see. And that is something to keep in mind. So although this mount does seem to help with the accuracy, and to run a little bit cooler as well, it does cause some issues with some unusable M-Lok in these back areas. One other area also, speaking of unusable M-Lok, if you look here on the left side, one nice thing that I particularly like about this chassis system is they have cutouts, both one here on the left for your sling attachment point that normally is on your handguard retainers. Not on every AK, but on a lot of them. And you also have a little bit here on the bottom just to help when you're installing it so it's not colliding constantly and all that. So that's great. You don't need to cut off your sling loops or anything like that, as I said, but this also means you can't span this. So both of these are actual M-Lok, at least here on the side. It's not on the bottom here, interestingly, but you can use this M-Lok slot, you can use this M-Lok slot behind it, but you can't use both of them in conjunction. The weird thing here is this is not an M-Lok slot. This is almost one, and then they made the cut for the handguard retainer right here, and then it goes to an actual M-Lok slot both behind it and in front of it. That's kind of an issue. In my case, where I mounted the foregrip, it ended up fine, but I could see for a lot of people, if you wanted to mount the foregrip right here, you can't. So I kind of wish that they would have done the opposite, where this slot right here was I don't know how they'd really do it, but if they wanted to do one that's like half a slot that's not really as usable, then I would have preferred that they maybe would have done this one instead. And I don't know. I feel like they could have spaced the bottom M-Lok slots a bit differently is what I'm saying, and probably made that work a bit better, because as a result you do have quite a bit of unusable M-Lok slots on this. As I said, all of them that I want to use are fine, but yeah, so keep that in mind as well. And one more thing, one huge thing I like about the Zenitco upper hand guards is that it may look like it would touch. It comes really close to touching the gas tube, but actually it makes no contact anywhere with the gas tube, and that's really, really great. This runs extremely cool. However, the Sureshot looks the same way, and actually I thought it worked the same way, where it doesn't actually have any contact, but this is actually all one piece. The gas tube is connected, it's totally bolted on to this upper handguard, so you would transmit a good bit of heat here, especially in the summer. This is not an issue, and I've been shooting this a lot for the review. Haven't ran into an issue because it's the middle of winter. It's really cold right now, but probably will get a little hot up here when it is the summer. As I said, hasn't been yet, so maybe it won't end up being an actual issue. I'm concerned it will, but we will see on that. So I've been somewhat trying to go part by part, somewhat logically, but there's a few more things I wanted to talk about that kind of are going to be jumping around a little bit. The first thing, I'm going to be jumping back to the free-floating mount. One thing you'll want to note about this is completely solid, so you won't be able to use your cleaning rod, unfortunately. And you might be wondering, I've had comments, people asking before, why, like, does anyone even use the cleaning rod on these AKs? Because a lot of people run them and you never really see people using them. And even in my own AK cleaning video, even though back then when I did the video I had the cleaning rod here, I didn't actually use it. The reason I like to have it is not to clean it. There are better rods to do that, or bore snakes, etc. But I do like to have it on the rifle itself, just to clear out bore obstructions. Now, it's not that bad to not have it on. In my case, I just moved the cleaning rod into this pack here, which I always take with me to the range and hunting and all of that. So I still have a cleaning kit if I need to knock out any bore obstructions, but it is nice to have a cleaning rod on here that I can just grab the entire rifle and go and have everything all set without needing to grab anything extra whatsoever. So losing that is not great, but in my opinion, it's not the end of the world either. And then one other nice thing that I do like about this chassis system, similar to the fact you don't need to cut anything on your handguard retainer. I'm a big fan of almost applying like the open-close principle, like in coding or I believe in engineering as well. Basically where I have the gun itself and I don't really change anything with it after the fact. It's kind of a closed system then, and then whatever I add on to it shouldn't be modifying its original functionality. You know, even though I'm planning on keeping this on here, I would like to, just in case, I would like to be able to go back to the original configuration. So that was important to me with the handguard retainer. And another nice thing is, same idea with the rear iron sight. A lot of systems out there for the AK, for mounting optics and all that, do kind of use the rear iron sight base as the mounting platform. Texas Weapon Systems, for example, that one, the whole dust cover hinges off of that, and you do need to replace your rear iron sight, which isn't great. Now, of course, as you can see here, I can't use my iron sights in this current configuration. This Reptilium mount that I have on here completely blocks it, and this isn't a QD, so if this is important to you, I do think this is a good spot to mount the optic, and if you're worried about your optic going down, then just you can put a QD on there. The reason I didn't go with a QD, and the reason I went with this specific mount over others, is because it is nice and low profile, nothing can get snagged. I have had an ADM mount, which is, it has quite good QD levers, but I have had one, luckily it was on an LPVO mount, so there was 2 levers holding everything in place. But one of them got snagged on my gear, even though it has like an unlock lever in addition to the regular lever, and it just came loose. So I think if you get a good optic, and you know, somewhat controversial here, but I do think that if you just get a quality optic, in the case of this Aimpoint, this is extremely reliable, you should be fine and not need to worry about it too much. Because generally, from what I've heard others say, is that if it's enough to take out a quality optic, it's enough to take out the entire rifle. Opinions may vary on that point. Point is, I personally find that QDs are another failure point because I have had them fail. So I prefer something that just bolts on really strong. And yeah, that's why I chose the Reptilia. I was also considering the Geissele mount, but that stuck out a bit more. And I do like, as I said, this is quite low profile. But, you know, somewhat beside the point there. But if you are buying this chassis, then maybe it'll help for a bit of a consideration when you are setting it up. Other than that, I have several hundred rounds through this at this point. As far as how it runs, this is a really comfortable handguard. If you watched my original installation video, I was pretty concerned about how it would hold up because they do not give any torque values. And I don't know why I kept saying that's pretty weird. It is pretty weird, but I said that like 10 times in that video. But nothing's come loose. I Loctited absolutely everything rather generously, so it's all good. And I didn't actually torque it down with a torque wrench or anything because they warned not to over torque it, but they didn't say what is over torquing it. So I just kind of did everything to what feels like about 12 to 15 inch-pounds, and we're good there. One last thing to note while I'm talking about the installation is this does make it quite a bit harder to take apart the rifle. When I bought this, I wasn't aware how much this actually stuck out. It just kind of looked like it didn't stick out as much, but with how much it does come out, this section over the dust cover itself, it does prevent you from lifting it up. And actually, with the cheek riser I have on here now, I have to fold the stock to the side before I'm able to pop the dust cover out. So it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, but you don't need to clean it too often. Should keep it well lubricated and all that, but I do prefer the hinged dust covers like the Zenitco B33 that I showed earlier, the Texas Weapon Systems that I also mentioned, and there's a lot of other options which I'm not going to talk about all of them because I don't have the time or I don't have the experience as well with those. So overall, I would say it is pretty good. I would say it's definitely one of the better options out on the market. There is a lot of other options, and you know, do your research. Tons of good ones. If I were to compare this myself with the Zenitco setup, actually, I would say that the Zenitco setup is by far a much better option. When I was doing this build, and I have all the videos on my channel if you are interested, a lot of the parts were somewhat tedious to install on this, but they were ultimately, I would say, less tedious than some of the kind of, you know, just a bunch of the screws and how you kind of had to finesse the handguard retainer on here. It was a little bit annoying, and I do feel like the Zenitco is easier to install. Of course, once you get it installed, it's kind of whatever, because then it's on. But I do feel like this is a better thought out system overall. I especially like the upper handguard or the gas tube cover, the fact that it doesn't touch the handguard anywhere, or the gas tube anywhere, pardon me. And also, and I presume this is the case with the basis as well, but you know, you don't have any issues where you can't use certain parts, or you know, you can't mount to certain areas because the M-Lok is unusable because it's blocked. And surprisingly, although I have seen people say about how Zenitco is heavy, it's actually not. This is one of the lighter options available for AKs. Not the lightest. You can go kind of space gun with some of the certain options available, especially on the US market, and nothing wrong with those. Some of them actually sound like they're pretty high quality, but I do think the Zenitco is a better setup overall. But the Sureshot is certainly a very good option as well, and it does a lot of things right. I do like the handguard shape overall, very comfortable to shoot with, and so far it has been holding up. So quite a lot of good things on here as well. But it is just somewhat difficult to not compare it to the Zenitco, and they are in a kind of similar price category as well, or at least they used to be. And we'll see how that pans out in the future. But that covers it. So I would say pretty decent. So thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have any other questions. I do plan on doing a long-term review of this eventually, maybe several months, maybe a year, maybe more than that. But I will do another video eventually at some point to just talk about if there's any issues with this eventually down the line, if anything else pops up, and just how it holds up in general. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Take care.